The transport shuttle docked with Kepler-7 station at exactly 800 hours Galactic Standard Time. Inside the passenger bay, Minho sat quietly in his reinforced seat, watching the other passengers prepare to disembark. Most of them were aliens he had never seen before. Tall, graceful beings with blue skin and extra arms, small furry creatures with large eyes, and crystalline entities that chimed softly when they moved. None of them looked at him directly. When they did glance his way, they quickly turned away, their various forms of body language screaming discomfort. Minho had grown used to this reaction during his journey from Earth. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and their reputation preceded them. The shuttle bay doors opened with a soft hiss and the passengers began filing out. Minho waited until last, as had become his habit. No point in making the others more nervous than they already were. He gathered his single bag, a simple Earth-made backpack that looked crude compared to the floating luggage pods the other passengers used, and stepped into the corridor. Kepler-7 was impressive. The station stretched for kilometers in all directions, its walls lined with windows that showed the stars beyond. Artificial gravity kept everyone's feet firmly planted on the deck, though Minho noticed it was set lighter than Earth normal. Everything here was built for species that had evolved on gentler worlds. He followed the signs toward the academic sector, his heavy footsteps echoing in the corridors despite his efforts to walk quietly. Other beings in the hallways gave him a wide berth, pressing themselves against walls or ducking into side passages. A group of small, bird-like aliens actually took flight when they saw him coming, their wings beating frantically as they sought higher perches. Minho sighed quietly. This was going to be a long semester. The Galactic Academy of Sciences occupied an entire section of the station. The main hall was vast and beautiful, with holographic displays showing lectures from across them. The galaxy and students of dozens of species moving between classrooms. The ceiling was transparent aluminum, offering a stunning view of the nebula beyond. At the registration desk, a tall being with purple skin and multiple eyes processed his paperwork. Her nameplate read, Registrar Vexani, in several languages, including the human script he was still learning to read. Minho Kim, she said, pronouncing his name carefully. Human exchange student, xenobiology major. Her voice had a musical quality, but he could hear the tension in it. Your dormitory. Assignment is in Sector 7, Room 445. Your schedule has been uploaded to your personal device. She slid a small tablet across the desk without quite meeting his eyes. Minho took it gently, noting how she flinched when his fingers briefly touched the surface she had been holding. Thank you, he said softly. Is there anything else I need to know? The cafeteria serves food compatible with most species, she replied, though I'm not sure if we have proper nutrition for your kind. Minho smiled, trying to look non-threatening. It probably didn't help. Humans, apparently, had too many teeth. I brought supplements from Earth. I'll be fine eating whatever's available. Vexani's multiple eyes blinked in what might have been surprise. You can eat our food? Humans are pretty adaptable, Minho said. We evolved to eat almost anything organic. It's one of the advantages of coming from a difficult world. At the mention of Earth, Vexani's skin actually paled to a lighter purple. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world in the galactic databases. Most civilized species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours. Minho's first class was Introduction to Galactic Biology, taught by Professor Clint in Lecture Hall C. He arrived early, hoping to find a seat where he wouldn't disturb the other students too much. The hall was built in the standard galactic style, tiered seating arranged in a circle around a central platform where the professor would stand. He chose a seat in the back row, near the wall. The chair groaned slightly, under his weight. Everything on the station was built for lighter species, and his Earth-adapted bone density made even simple furniture complain. Other students began filtering in as the class time approached. There was Veltar, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly with each step. Her species, the Quillians, were known for their mathematical abilities and perfect memory. Hexus was an arachnoid, spider-like with 6 arms and compound eyes that seemed to see in all directions at once. His people were natural engineers and builders. Bloom was perhaps the most unusual, a chloran whose plant-like body photosynthesized energy directly from light. She moved slowly and gracefully, her leaves rustling with each breath. The chlorans were philosophers and artists, known for their patience and wisdom. All of them noticed Minho immediately. Feltar's chiming became higher-pitched, a sign of distress in her species. Hexus's compound eyes fixed on him for a moment before the arachnoid quickly looked away and moved to the far side of the lecture hall. Bloom's leaves actually changed color, shifting from green to a paler shade that indicated alarm. More students arrived, and the pattern repeated. They would enter, see Minho, and immediately seek seats as far from him as possible. Soon he was sitting alone in an entire section of the lecture hall like he carried some invisible disease. Only one student seemed different. Diane, a Felician with cat-like features and golden fur, paused when she saw him. Her large eyes studied him curiously rather than fearfully. She didn't approach, but she didn't flee either. Instead, she took a seat about halfway across the hall where she could observe him without being obvious about it. Phalis was not a dangerous world like Earth, but it wasn't exactly peaceful either. The Felicians had evolved as hunters, though they had long since moved beyond the need for violence. Perhaps that gave Dayan a better understanding of what she was seeing. Not a monster, but a predator that had chosen not to hunt. Professor Clint arrived right on time. The elderly Centaurian moved slowly to the center of the platform, his forelegs carrying him with careful dignity. His species was known for their teaching abilities and their long lifespans, which gave them perspective on galactic history. "Welcome to Introduction to Galactic Biology," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. "In this course, we will study the incredible diversity of life that has evolved across our galaxy. From the silicon-based Quillians to the energy-feeding photons, life has found ways to thrive in environments we once thought impossible." His eyes swept the lecture hall and paused when they reached Minho. The professor's expression was unreadable, but he continued without missing a beat. "We are fortunate this semester to have an exchange student from Earth," Professor Clint said. "This will give us a unique opportunity to study life from one of the galaxy's most challenging environments." Every head in the lecture hall turned to look at Minho. He felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment but tried to maintain a neutral expression. Being the center of attention had never been comfortable for him, and being stared at by dozens of alien eyes was particularly unsettling. "Perhaps you could introduce yourself?" the professor suggested gently. Minho stood slowly, very aware that his movements seemed to make several students flinch. "My name is Minho Kim. I'm from Seoul, which is a city on Earth. I'm here to study xenobiology because I want to understand how life develops differently on other worlds." His voice was quiet and careful, but in the acoustically perfect hall, every word carried clearly. Several students exchanged glances that seemed to say, "That's what a Deathworlder sounds like." "Excellent," Professor Clint said. "I'm sure you'll provide valuable insights into extremophile biology. Please have a seat and let's begin." As Minho sat back down, he noticed that Dayan was still watching him. When their eyes met, she didn't look away immediately like the others did. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that in Felician body language indicated curiosity rather than fear. Maybe, Minho thought, this semester wouldn't be completely lonely after all. 3 weeks had passed since Minho's arrival at Kepler-7 station. The routine had become familiar. Wake up in his reinforced dormitory bed, eat breakfast alone in the cafeteria while other students whispered and stared, attend lectures where he sat in isolation, and spend evenings studying in his room. The academic work was interesting, at least. Professor Clint's advanced biochemistry class had become his favorite. The old Centaurian had a gift for explaining complex concepts, and the subject matter fascinated Minho. Today, they were learning about how different species process toxins, a topic that hit close to home for someone from Earth. "The Zephyrian liver," Professor Clint was saying. pointing to a holographic display of internal organs, can process compounds that would kill most other species instantly. This is because their homeworld has naturally occurring chemicals in the atmosphere that are deadly to visitors. Minho took notes on his tablet, aware that several students were sneaking glances at him. He had gotten used to being the subject of curiosity. Veltar, the crystalline Quillian, often seemed to be studying him like he was a particularly interesting equation. Hexus, the arachnoid, watched him with compound eyes that missed nothing. Even Bloom, the plant-like Chlorin, would orient her leaves toward him during lectures. Only Diane, the golden-furred Felician, had made any real attempt at communication. She had started sitting a few rows closer each day, and yesterday she had actually nodded a greeting when she saw him in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The lesson was interrupted by a sound that made every alien in the room freeze. The station's emergency alarm. The lights shifted to red, and the walls began displaying urgent messages in multiple languages. Security. Alert, dangerous prisoner escaped. All civilians shelter in place. Repeat, shelter in place. Professor Clint's forelegs stamped nervously. Class, please remain calm. The station's security protocols are very thorough. We'll simply wait here until... The lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a dim orange glow. In the distance, they could hear the sound of metal being torn and twisted. What could do that? Veltar chimed, her crystalline body resonating with fear frequencies that made everyone's teeth ache. Minho was already on his feet, his senses alert in a way that would have been familiar to anyone from Earth. His hearing, evolved from ancestors, who had to detect predators in tall grass, was picking up sounds the others couldn't hear yet. Heavy footsteps, breathing that was too deep and too slow to be from any of the species he knew were on the station, the scrape of claws on metal. Something big, he said quietly. Something dangerous. The other students looked at him with surprise. How could the human know that when they couldn't hear anything? The answer came seconds later when the reinforced classroom door exploded inward. The being that stepped through the twisted metal was a nightmare from the galaxy's worst stories. Saskaval stood 8 feet tall, his body covered in natural armor plates that looked like they could stop plasma bolts. His arms ended in claws that were longer than Minho's fingers, and his face was a mass of scars and cruel intelligence. Brutarians were known throughout the galaxy as the species you didn't want to meet in a dark corridor. They were natural warriors who had taken centuries to move beyond their violent instincts. Most had succeeded. Some, like Saskaval, had not. Nobody move. Saskaval rumbled in Galactic Standard, his voice like grinding stone. Green liquid dripped from his claws, blood from the security officers who had tried to stop him. I need hostages. The pretty ones first. His small, dark eyes swept the classroom and fixed on Dayan. The Felician was frozen in terror, her golden fur standing on end and her large eyes wide with panic. Chaos erupted. Veltar's body chimed in frequencies that hurt to hear as she tried to make herself smaller. Hexus scuttled toward the far wall, his 6 arms moving frantically. Bloom's leaves turned pale as her photosynthetic patches shut down in shock. Professor Clint backed away on unsteady legs, reaching for the emergency communicator on his belt. But Minho did something that surprised everyone in the room, including Saskaval. He stepped forward. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with the calm confidence of someone who had assessed the situation and decided on a course of action. His movement was so unexpected that even the murderous Brutarian paused. Is there a problem here? Minho asked, his voice level and controlled. Saskaval's scarred face twisted into what might have been amusement. Problem? The only problem is deciding which of you softshells to take with me, though you... He studied Minho with new interest. You're different. What species are you? Human, Minho replied simply. The word sent a ripple of recognition through the room. Professor Clint's eyes widened. Several students who had been cowering looked up with sudden hope. Even Saskaval seemed to hesitate. Human, the Brutarian repeated, slowly. From the Deathworld. I've heard stories about your kind. They say you're dangerous. Minho shrugged slightly. We can be. Good. Saskival's claws clicked together with excitement. I was getting bored fighting weaklings, but first I still need hostages. He turned back toward Dayon, who whimpered, softly. That was when Minho's demeanor changed completely. The casual, non-threatening posture vanished. His stance shifted subtly, weight balanced, muscles ready. His eyes, which the other students had always thought looked kind, became hard and calculating. For the first time since arriving at the station, Minho looked exactly like what he was, a predator from a world where only the strongest survived. You don't want to do that, he said quietly. Saskival laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone. And why not, little human? What are you going to do to stop me? Whatever I have to. The Brutarian's laughter died as he really looked at Minho for the first time. Something in the human's eyes, in his stance, in the absolute certainty of his voice, triggered instincts that even a murderer couldn't ignore. But Saskival had killed too many times to back down now. With a roar that shook the walls, he lunged forward, claws extended toward Dayon. He never made it. Minho moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. One moment he was standing calmly near his desk. The next, he was intercepting Saskival's charge. The human ducked under the Brutarian's claws, grabbed the alien's extended arm and used momentum and leverage to redirect the 8-foot killer's momentum. Saskival crashed into the reinforced wall with a sound like a starship collision. The impact was hard enough to crack the transparent aluminum window, and for a moment the murderer just lay there stunned. The classroom fell completely silent except for the sound of Saskival's labored breathing. Every eye was on Minho, who stood over the fallen Brutarian with the same calm expression he wore during lectures. Security should be here in about 90 seconds, Minho said conversationally, as if he hadn't just single-handedly stopped a rampaging killer. The station's emergency response protocols are actually pretty good. They just weren't designed for someone who can tear through reinforced doors. Saskival tried to get up, snarling with rage and pain. Minho simply placed one foot on the Brutarian's chest and pressed down. The alien's natural armor, which could stop energy weapons, cracked under the pressure. I'd stay down if I were you, Minho suggested mildly. Your left shoulder is dislocated, you probably have a concussion, and I'm really hoping this doesn't have to get any more unpleasant. Dayon stared at him with an expression of complete shock. You saved me. Minho glanced over at her and smiled, the same gentle smile he had tried to use when introducing himself to the registrar. On his face, after what she had just seen him do, it was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. Of course I did, he said simply. That's what you do when someone's in danger. Professor Clint found his voice first. In 40 years of teaching, he said slowly, I have never seen anything like that. Most humans could do something similar, Minho replied, though I'm probably better than average. My parents made sure I knew how to handle dangerous situations. He looked down at Saskival, who was still struggling weakly under his foot. My world taught us that the strongest don't get to prey on the weak, not if the rest of us have anything to say about it. In the distance, they could hear the sound of security forces finally breaking through whatever barriers Saskival had created. Heavy boots were running toward the classroom. They're coming, Minho said. Everyone should probably stay back when they get here. They're going to be nervous, and nervous people with weapons can be dangerous. As if his presence in the room hadn't just demonstrated exactly how dangerous someone could be. But somehow, as the other students looked at him, standing calmly over the defeated killer, they didn't feel afraid of Minho anymore. For the first time since he had arrived at Kepler 7 station, they were beginning to understand what it meant to have a human watching over them. The security team that burst through the ruined classroom door was heavily armed and clearly expecting the worst. 6 officers in combat armor, carrying weapons designed to stop even the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They moved in perfect formation, their leaders scanning the room for threats. What they found was not what they expected. Saskival, the escaped murderer who had killed 2 of their colleagues, was lying on the floor with a human's foot pressed firmly against his chest. The Brutarian was conscious but obviously defeated, his natural armor cracked and his breathing shallow. The human, Minho Kim, according to the files, looked completely calm. He wasn't even breathing hard. His clothes weren't torn. There was no sign that he had been in a fight at all, except for the fact that one of the galaxy's most dangerous killers was pinned helplessly beneath his foot. "Officers," Minho said politely, nodding to the security team. "I'm glad you made it. This individual broke into our classroom and threatened the other students. He's subdued now, but he might have a concussion, so you should probably have medical check him over." Captain Zorth, the Voltarian who led the security team, stared at the scene with all four of his eyes. In 30 years of law enforcement, he had never seen anything quite like this. You stopped Saskaval?" he asked, his translator struggling, with the disbelief in his voice. "He was threatening my classmates," Minho replied simply. "I couldn't let that happen." The other students were still pressed against the far wall, watching the exchange with expressions of awe and terror. Veltar's crystalline body was chiming softly with frequencies that indicated amazement. Hexus had all 6 of his compound eyes fixed on Minho. Even Professor Clint seemed unable to process what he had witnessed, but it was Diane who spoke first. "He saved us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The killer was going to take hostages and Minho just stopped him. Like it was easy." Captain Zorth signaled to his team, and 2 officers moved forward with restraints designed for Brutarian physiology. Minho stepped back, allowing them to take Saskaval into custody. The murderer was barely conscious, mumbling something about impossible and Deathworld monsters. "We'll need statements from everyone," Captain Zorth said, his professional demeanor returning. "But first, Mr. Kim, I need to understand exactly what happened here." Minho looked uncomfortable with the attention. "It wasn't really complicated. He broke in, threatened the class, and I stopped him. Basic threat assessment and response." "Basic?" Professor Clint's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Kim, you single-handedly defeated a Brutarian warrior. Saskaval had already killed 2 trained security officers. How is that basic?" The question seemed to genuinely puzzle Minho. He was strong and had natural weapons, but he was also angry and sloppy. He telegraphed his movements and committed fully to his attacks. That made him predictable. He gestured toward the cracked wall where Saskaval had impacted. "I used his own momentum against him. It's a standard technique we learn in school on Earth." "In school?" Veltar chimed, her voice reaching frequencies that indicated shock. "Your species learns combat in educational institutions?" "Everyone does," Minho confirmed. "Basic hand-to-hand combat, wilderness survival, emergency medicine, threat assessment. We start when we're about 6 years old. It's considered essential education." The security officers exchanged glances. Captain Zorth had read the files on Earth, the classification as a Class 12 death world, the warnings about human psychology and physical capabilities. But reading about it and seeing it in action were very different things. 6 years old, Hexus repeated, his mechanical-sounding voice filled with something approaching horror. "Your children learn to fight." "Among other things," Minho said. "We also learn math, literature, science, art. But yes, we learn to defend ourselves and others. You kind of have to when your planet is actively trying to kill you." He looked around the classroom, noticing how the other students were staring at him. "Look, I know this probably seems scary to you. I know my reputation as a Deathworlder isn't exactly comforting, but I want you to understand something important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Just because humans can be dangerous doesn't mean we want to be. Everything I learned about fighting, I learned so I could protect people who couldn't, protect themselves. The whole point of being strong is to use that strength for something good." Bloom, who had been silent throughout the entire incident, finally spoke. Her plant-like voice was soft and thoughtful. "You could have killed him. It wasn't a question." Everyone in the room could see that Minho had been holding back. The casual way he had stopped Saskaval's charge, the controlled precision of his movements, the fact that he had ended the fight in seconds without any visible effort, it all pointed to capabilities far beyond what he had displayed. "Yes," Minho admitted, "but killing should always be the last option, not the first. Saskaval was dangerous, but he was also scared and desperate. People like that can sometimes be reasoned with, if you give them the chance. He murdered 2 security officers, Captain Zorth pointed out grimly. Minho's expression darkened slightly. And he'll face justice for that. But that's not my decision to make. My job was to protect my classmates, not to execute judgment. The security captain studied the young human for a long moment. In his experience, beings with the power to kill easily usually fell into one of 2 categories, those who enjoyed it too much and those who avoided it entirely. Minho seemed to represent a third option, someone who could kill if necessary but chose not to unless absolutely required. We'll still need detailed statements, Captain Zorth said finally. And there will probably be an investigation. Incidents like this don't happen often on Kepler 7. Of course, Minho replied. Whatever you need. As the security team prepared to leave with their prisoner, Saskaval regained enough consciousness to focus on Minho. The Brutarian's eyes were filled with a mixture of pain, rage, and something that might have been respect. What are you? He gasped. Minho looked down at him with what might have been pity. I'm a student who wants to learn about xenobiology, just like I told you before. No, Saskaval insisted. You're something else. Something more dangerous than the stories say. Maybe, Minho admitted quietly. But I'm also something the stories don't mention. I'm someone who chooses to use that danger to protect others instead of hurt them. As the security team carried Saskaval away, the classroom fell into an awkward silence. The emergency lights were still casting everything in orange shadows, and the cracked window provided a constant reminder of the violence that had just occurred. Professor Clint was the first to move, checking on his students and ensuring that everyone was physically unharmed. But the psychological impact was obvious. The way they looked at Minho had changed completely. Before, they had seen him as a frightening mystery, a Deathworlder whose presence made them nervous. Now they saw him as something else entirely, a guardian, a protector, someone who had risked himself to keep them safe. Dayan was the first to approach him. She walked slowly, her feline grace making no sound on the classroom floor. When she reached Minho, she looked up at him with large, golden eyes that held no fear. Thank you, she said simply. Minho smiled. That same gentle expression he had been trying to use since arriving at the station. But now, instead of seeming incongruous on the face of a Deathworlder, it seemed to fit perfectly. You don't need to thank me, he replied. I would do the same thing for anyone in this room. That's what friends do. The word friend seemed to surprise everyone, including Minho himself. He had been so focused on not frightening his classmates that he hadn't realized how much he wanted to be accepted by them. Friends, Veltar repeated, her chiming taking on warmer tones. Yes, I think I would like that very much. One by one, the other students began to approach, not with fear, but with curiosity and gratitude. For the first time since arriving at Kepler 7, Minho found himself surrounded by classmates who wanted to be near him, rather than afraid of him. It was, he thought, a pretty good start to building something better than just tolerance. Maybe with time it could become genuine understanding, and maybe, just maybe, they could help him understand something about himself too. That being dangerous didn't have to mean being alone. The investigation took 3 days. During that time, Minho found himself the center of attention in ways he had never experienced before. Security officers interviewed him repeatedly, asking for details about the fight that he didn't think were particularly important. Station administrators wanted to understand how a single exchange student had done what an entire security team had failed to do. But the most significant change was in his classmates, where before they had given him frightened glances and wide berths. Now they watched him with open curiosity. Veltar had started sitting closer during lectures, her crystalline body chiming with what he was learning to recognize as fascination rather than fear. Hexus had even asked him a direct question during Professor Clint's seminar on comparative anatomy. Your skeletal structure, the arachnoid had said, his compound eyes fixed on Minho with scientific interest. The bone density readings from the medical scanner were Unexpected. Professor Clint had pulled up Minho's scan results with the human's permission. The holographic display showed a skeleton that looked normal enough from the outside, but the density readings made several students gasp. "These numbers can't be right," Bloom said, her leaves rustling with confusion. "This indicates bone density nearly 3 times galactic standard." "It's right," Minho confirmed. "Earth's gravity is about 1.3 times what the station maintains. Over millions of years of evolution, humans developed heavier bones to handle the stress. We also have denser muscle tissue and more efficient cardiovascular systems. But that would make you incredibly strong compared to most species," Veltar chimed. "Compared to most, yes," Minho admitted. "Though not compared to everyone. There are species out there that would make me look weak." "Like the Brutarians?" Dion asked. She had become the most talkative of his classmates, her natural Felician curiosity overcoming her earlier caution. "Saskava was actually stronger than me," Minho explained. "His species evolved as natural warriors. In terms of raw physical power, he had a significant advantage." "Then how did you defeat him so easily?" Professor Clint asked. The old Centaurian's academic curiosity was clearly engaged. Minho thought about how to explain it in terms they would understand. "Earth didn't just make us strong. It made us smart about fighting. Everything on my world is dangerous. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the bacteria. Humans survived by learning to think tactically." He stood up and moved to the center of the classroom, his movements fluid and controlled. Saskaval was angry and desperate. That made him predictable. He charged straight at his target, committed all his momentum to the attack, and left himself vulnerable to redirection. To demonstrate, he gestured to Hexus. "May I?" The arachnoid looked nervous but nodded. Minho moved slowly, showing each step of what he had done. "He came at me like this. Fast, direct, all his weight behind the charge. But when you're moving, that fast you can't change direction quickly." He mimed grabbing an arm and pivoting. I used his momentum against him. Instead of trying to stop 8 feet of armored killer, I just changed where he was going. Physics did the rest. It sounds simple," Veltar chimed. "The technique is simple," Minho agreed, "but it takes years of practice to use it instinctively. We start learning these skills when we're children because that's the only way to make them automatic." "What else did you learn?" Bloom asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. The question opened a floodgate. For the first time since arriving at the station, Minho found himself talking openly about his home world and his education. He told them about survival training in the Australian outback, where 10-year-old humans learned to find water in one of Earth's harshest environments. He described emergency medical training, where children learned to treat injuries that would kill most galactic species. "We learned to identify edible plants and dangerous animals," he explained. "How to build shelters from natural materials, how to signal for rescue, how to treat shock and trauma. By the time we graduate from basic education, most humans can survive alone in hostile environments for weeks." "All humans learn this?" Professor Clint asked, clearly fascinated. "The basics, yes. Some specialize further. My mother is a wilderness guide. She can track animals across terrain where most species couldn't even walk. My father is an emergency responder. He runs toward disasters that would make most people flee." Hexus clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "This explains your reaction during the crisis. While we were panicking, you were assessing." "Exactly," Minho confirmed. "Panic gets you killed on Earth. We're taught to stay calm, observe, and act decisively. The first rule of Earth survival is that fear is just information. It tells you something is dangerous, but it shouldn't control your actions." Dion leaned forward, her golden fur catching the light. "But you felt fear, didn't you, when Saskaval broke in?" "Of course I did," Minho replied. "Fear keeps you alive, but Earth-trained fear is different from what most species experience. Instead of freezing or fleeing, human fear makes us more alert, faster, stronger. Our bodies flood with chemicals that enhance our abilities." "The fight-or-flight response," Professor Clint murmured. "I've read about it in the xenobiology texts, but seeing it in action was remarkable." "Most species evolved the flight part of that response," Minho explained. Humans kept both parts. When we can't run, we fight. When we can't fight, we think our way out. When we can't think our way out, he shrugged, we get creative. Over the following days, these conversations became regular occurrences. His classmates' initial terror had transformed into fascination with what they saw as an impossibly dangerous but ultimately benevolent being. They asked endless questions about Earth, about human culture, about the training that had shaped him. Minho found himself enjoying the attention in a way he never had before. For years, his abilities had made him stand out in uncomfortable ways. On Earth, being exceptionally good at combat and survival skills was useful, but not particularly remarkable. Everyone learned these things. But here, among beings from gentler worlds, his capabilities were seen as almost miraculous. More importantly, they were seen as protective rather than threatening. Would you teach us? Diane asked one day after a particularly detailed explanation of human tactical thinking. Not to fight like you do. I don't think any of us could learn that. But maybe some of the other things? The survival skills? The emergency medicine? Minho was surprised by the request. You want to learn human techniques? Why wouldn't we? Veltar chimed. Your methods have been tested by the most dangerous environment in known space. If they work on Earth, they would work anywhere. Besides, Bloom added, her leaves rustling with what might have been amusement. After seeing what you can do, we feel somewhat underprepared for emergencies. Professor Clint nodded approvingly. It would make an excellent independent study. Project. Practical application of Deathworld survival techniques to standard galactic environments. Minho felt something warm spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. For the first time in months, he felt truly useful. Not just tolerated or feared, but genuinely wanted. I'd be happy to teach you, he said. Though fair warning, human training methods might seem intense compared to what you're used to. After watching you stop Saskaval with your bare hands, Hexus clicked, I think we can handle intense. As they made plans for their first training session, Minho reflected on how completely his situation had changed. A week ago, he had been the terrifying Deathworlder that everyone avoided. Now he was becoming something he had never expected to be in this environment, a teacher, a protector, and maybe even a friend. The irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken an act of violence to show his classmates that he was fundamentally nonviolent. It had taken demonstrating his capacity for destruction to prove that he chose construction instead. Perhaps that was the most human thing of all, the ability to be dangerous and gentle at the same time, to carry great power and use it only for protection. It was a lesson his species had learned over millennia of surviving on the galaxy's most hostile world. And now, maybe, he could help his new friends learn it too. The training sessions began in the station's recreational facility during off-peak hours. Minho had requested a space where they wouldn't disturb other users, partly because he wasn't sure what the reactions would be to a human teaching combat techniques to other species. He needn't have worried. Word of what had happened in Professor Clint's classroom had spread throughout the academic sector, and if anything, the other station residents seemed relieved to know that the mysterious human exchange student was actively working to make everyone safer. The first session was awkward. Minho had never taught anyone before, and his classmates were clearly nervous about learning anything that involved physical activity from someone who had casually defeated a Brutarian warrior. We'll start simple, Minho said, standing in the center of the exercise area. Veltar, Hexus, Diane, and Bloom had arranged themselves in a careful semicircle around him, close enough to see but far enough away to feel safe. Basic situational awareness. Is that a fighting technique? Diane asked, her golden fur rippling with nervous energy. It's the most important technique, Minho replied. Most dangerous situations can be avoided entirely if you see them coming. Early enough. On Earth we call it keeping your head on a swivel. He gestured to the room around them. Right now, how many exits are there from this space? The aliens looked around, counting. 3, Veltar chimed confidently. 4, Minho corrected gently. You missed the emergency maintenance hatch in the ceiling. It's marked by the different colored panel directly above Hexus. All compound eyes swiveled upward, and the arachnoid made a clicking sound of surprise. I didn't notice that. Most people don't until they train themselves to look. Emergency exits are often placed in unexpected locations. Knowing where they are could save your life someday. For the next hour, Minho walked them through basic observation exercises: how to identify potential threats in a crowd, how to position yourself to see approaching danger, how to plan escape routes before you need them. This feels almost paranoid, Bloom admitted, her leaves rustling with discomfort. On Earth we have a saying, Minho replied. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. But more seriously, this isn't about living in fear. It's about being prepared. The goal is to enjoy your life while being ready for problems. Like Saskaval, Diane said quietly. Exactly. If I hadn't been aware of the sounds he was making before he broke through the door, I might not have been ready to act when he appeared. The sessions continued twice a week. Minho introduced basic first aid techniques, showing them how to treat injuries that would be minor by human standards but potentially fatal to species from gentler worlds. He taught them simple methods for finding clean water and safe food in emergency situations. Most importantly, he taught them to think strategically. Every problem has multiple solutions, he explained during their fourth session. Humans survived on Earth by being adaptable. When one approach failed, we tried another. When strength wasn't enough, we used intelligence. When intelligence wasn't enough, we used tools. What if tools aren't enough? Hexus asked. Minho smiled. Then we made better tools. Word of the training sessions eventually reached Professor Clint, who asked if he could observe. The old Centaurian watched with academic fascination as Minho guided his alien students through exercises that would have been familiar to any human child, but were revolutionary to beings from safer worlds. Remarkable, Professor Clint murmured to Minho during a break. You're not just teaching them techniques, you're teaching them a completely different way of thinking about their environment. That's the real lesson, Minho agreed. The specific skills are useful, but the mindset is what keeps you alive. Humans learn to see the world as a place full of opportunities and challenges, rather than just threats. And you believe other species can learn this perspective? Minho looked out at his students, who were practicing the situational awareness exercises with growing confidence. Veltar was identifying potential hazards in the room with mathematical precision. Hexus was using his multiple eyes to track several possible escape routes simultaneously. Dayon was learning to move with the silent grace that her predator ancestry had given her. Even Bloom was developing an uncanny ability to sense changes in air circulation that might indicate danger. They're already learning it, he said. They just needed someone to show them how. The real test came 2 months after the Saskaval incident. A minor emergency, a fire in one of the station's storage bays, triggered evacuation alarms in the academic sector. Instead of the usual chaos that accompanied such alerts, Minho watched with pride as his students calmly assessed the situation, identified the safest exit routes, and helped guide other panicked students to safety. Dayon even spotted an elderly Centaurian who had fallen during the evacuation, and administered the basic first aid Minho had taught her until medical personnel arrived. You saved someone's life today, Minho told her afterward. The Felician's ears twitched with embarrassment. I just used what you taught me. That's exactly right. And someday, maybe you'll teach someone else, and they'll save someone too. That's how good things spread. One person helping another who helps another. Professor Clint approached them as they watched the emergency crews finish their work. Mr. Kim, I've been thinking about your teaching methods. Would you consider developing a formal curriculum? The station administration is interested in expanding emergency preparedness training for all residents. Minho felt that warm feeling in his chest again, the satisfaction of being truly useful. I'd be honored to help. Excellent, though I should warn you it would mean staying beyond your original exchange period. The program would take at least a year to develop properly. Minho looked around at his friends, because that's what they had become somehow despite all the cultural and biological differences between them. Veltar, whose chiming had become as familiar as music, Hexus, whose clicking commentary made even the most serious discussions entertaining, Bloom, whose patient wisdom balanced his sometimes intense approach to problems, and Diane, whose courage and curiosity had made her the first to bridge the gap between human and alien. "I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be," he said honestly, that evening as they sat in the station's observation lounge watching the nebula shift colors beyond the transparent walls. Dayon asked the question that had been on everyone's minds. "Do you miss Earth?" Minho considered the question carefully. "I miss some things about it. The smell of rain, the way sunlight looks filtering through forest leaves, my family and friends back home. But Earth taught me something important. Home isn't just a place. It's the people who accept you for who you are and trust you to be there when they need you." He gestured at the group around him. "I've found that here too." Veltar's chiming took on harmonics that translated to deep contentment. "We were so afraid of you when you first arrived." "You had good reason to be," Minho replied. "Humans can be dangerous. We evolved on a world that demanded it. But we also learned that being dangerous only matters if you use that danger to protect the things you care about. Like us," Bloom said, her leaves rustling with what he had learned to recognize as affection. "Like you," he confirmed. Hexus clicked, thoughtfully. "So the galaxy's reputation about humans is both right and wrong. How so? Right that you're dangerous, wrong about why that matters." Minho smiled, looking out at the stars beyond the station walls. Somewhere out there was Earth, the deadly world that had forged his species into something the galaxy found terrifying. But here, surrounded by friends who had learned to see past the fear to the person beneath, he had found something even his harsh homeworld couldn't provide. He had found a place where being dangerous meant being trusted to keep others
safe.
Where his strength was valued not for its capacity to destroy but for its dedication to protect. Where the very traits that made humans feared throughout the galaxy had made him irreplaceably loved by the small community he had chosen to defend. It was, he thought, exactly what his parents had hoped he would find when they had encouraged him to apply for the exchange program. Not just knowledge about other species, but understanding about himself. The human Deathworlder everyone had been terrified of had become something far more important: a teacher, a protector, and a friend. And in the process, he had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength isn't measured by your capacity for violence, but by your willingness to use that capacity only in service of others. The galaxy might always fear humans for what they could do, but here on Kepler 7 station at least, they had learned to love one human for what he chose to do instead. And that, Minho reflected as he watched the stars wheel slowly past the observation windows, was probably the most human thing of all. Turning fear into understanding, one friendship at a time,